Question 1. The evaluation methodology shows that when processing an application for a Guam Firearms Identification (FID) card, what is the most critical step to ensure compliance with the Guam Firearms Act and maintain public safety? Option A. Focusing primarily on the applicant's stated intent for firearm ownership without thoroughly checking their background and residency status as mandated by law. Option B. A comprehensive review of all submitted documentation to confirm the applicant meets all statutory eligibility requirements and that all legally mandated information is present and accurate. Option C. Accepting an applicant's self-declaration for critical eligibility factors without independent verification, even if specific verification is legally required. Option D. Expediting the application process by prioritizing the applicant's stated information without requiring extensive verification of all supporting documents. Correct answer is B. A comprehensive review of all submitted documentation to confirm the applicant meets all statutory eligibility requirements and that all legally mandated information is present and accurate. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that processing applications for a Guam Firearms Identification (FID) card requires meticulous adherence to established procedures to ensure public safety and compliance with local statutes. The professional challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply with the government's responsibility to vet individuals thoroughly, preventing firearms from falling into the wrong hands. This requires a keen understanding of the Guam Firearms Act and its implementing regulations, specifically regarding the information required for a complete application and the grounds for denial. The best approach involves a systematic review of all submitted documentation against the requirements outlined in Guam law for FID card applications. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, residency, age, and ensuring they meet all statutory eligibility criteria, such as not having a disqualifying criminal record or mental health condition. This thoroughness directly aligns with the legislative intent of the Guam Firearms Act, which aims to regulate firearm ownership for the protection of the community. By meticulously checking each element, the processing officer upholds the integrity of the FID card system and fulfills their duty to the public. An approach that bypasses the verification of specific required documents, such as proof of residency or a mental health evaluation where mandated by law, is fundamentally flawed. This failure to adhere to statutory requirements creates a significant risk of issuing an FID card to an ineligible individual, directly contravening the public safety objectives of the Guam Firearms Act. Such an oversight constitutes a regulatory failure and a breach of professional responsibility. Another unacceptable approach is to rely solely on an applicant's self-attestation for critical eligibility factors without independent verification, where such verification is legally required. For instance, if Guam law mandates a background check or a specific type of certification, accepting only the applicant's word without pursuing the legally prescribed verification process is a direct violation of the law and undermines the entire vetting process. This approach prioritizes expediency over due diligence and legal compliance. Finally, an approach that prioritizes processing speed over the completeness and accuracy of the application information is professionally unsound. While efficiency is desirable, it cannot come at the expense of legal mandates and public safety. The professional reasoning process should involve a clear checklist derived from Guam's firearms regulations, ensuring each item is addressed and verified before an FID card is issued. If any required element is missing or raises concerns, the application must be flagged for further review or denial, following the established legal procedures. Question 2. System analysis indicates that a Guam Police Department officer is reviewing an application for a firearms identification (FID) card. The applicant has provided all standard documentation, including a self-attested statement of no criminal convictions. The officer notes a minor discrepancy in the applicant's listed address that does not immediately suggest fraud but requires further verification. What is the most procedurally sound and legally compliant method for the officer to proceed in Guam? Option A. Approve the FID card application immediately, assuming the applicant's self-attested statement of no criminal record is sufficient and the address discrepancy is minor. Option B. Initiate a detailed background check and attempt to verify the applicant's current and past addresses through official records, and if necessary, request clarification from the applicant before making a decision. Option C. Deny the FID card application due to the address discrepancy, citing it as a potential indicator of untrustworthiness without further investigation. Option D. Place the application on hold indefinitely, awaiting a future, unspecified event or clarification that may never materialize. Correct answer is B. Initiate a detailed background check and attempt to verify the applicant's current and past addresses through official records, and if necessary, request clarification from the applicant before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to pursue a lawful activity with the public safety mandate of the Guam Police Department. The FID card application process is designed to ensure that only qualified individuals possess firearms, and a thorough review is critical to prevent potential misuse. The challenge lies in interpreting the provided information accurately and applying the relevant Guam statutes and departmental policies without bias or undue haste. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing the applicant's information against available databases for any disqualifying factors as defined by Guam law, and conducting a thorough background investigation. This includes verifying the applicant's identity, residency, and ensuring they meet all statutory eligibility requirements for firearm possession. If any discrepancies or potential disqualifiers arise, further investigation or clarification from the applicant is warranted before a decision is made. This meticulous process is mandated by Guam's firearms regulations, which prioritize public safety by establishing clear criteria for FID card issuance and requiring due diligence from law enforcement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to approve the FID card application solely based on the applicant's assertion of having no criminal record, without independently verifying this claim through official channels. This bypasses the mandatory background check process, which is a cornerstone of firearms regulation in Guam and a direct violation of the due diligence required by law. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application immediately upon discovering a minor, unrelated past infraction that is not a disqualifying offense under Guam firearms law. This demonstrates a failure to understand the specific disqualifying criteria outlined in the statutes and could lead to an unlawful denial of the applicant's rights. A further incorrect approach is to delay the decision indefinitely without communicating with the applicant or initiating the necessary investigative steps. This constitutes administrative inefficiency and a failure to process the application in a timely manner, which can be detrimental to the applicant and may not align with departmental service standards or any applicable Guam administrative procedures for application processing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach FID card applications with a commitment to both public safety and due process. This involves a systematic process. First, thoroughly understanding the specific requirements and disqualifiers outlined in Guam's firearms statutes. Second, meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation. Third, conducting all mandated background checks and investigations. And fourth, making a decision based solely on the evidence and the law. If any ambiguity exists, seeking clarification or further information is paramount. This structured approach ensures fairness, compliance, and upholds the integrity of the firearms licensing system. Question 3. Implementation of a streamlined process for firearms identification, FID, card applications in Guam. What is the most effective approach to ensure both applicant rights and public safety are upheld according to Guam's regulatory framework? Option A. Adhering strictly to all statutory requirements for application submission, background checks, and eligibility verification as stipulated by Guam law, ensuring a comprehensive and procedurally sound review. Option B. Imposing additional, non-mandated documentation requirements and arbitrary delays on FID card applications beyond what is specified in Guam's firearms regulations. Option C. Expediting the FID card approval for applicants who appear to be responsible and have no obvious immediate concerns, even if all background checks are not fully completed. Option D. Denying an FID card application based on informal reports or suspicions, without providing the applicant a chance to address the concerns. The correct answer is A. Adhering strictly to all statutory requirements for application submission, background checks, and eligibility verification as stipulated by Guam law, ensuring a comprehensive and procedurally sound review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires navigating the specific procedural requirements for obtaining a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam, balancing the applicant's right to due process with the public safety mandate of the licensing authority. Misinterpreting or overlooking procedural steps can lead to delays, incorrect denials, or even legal challenges, impacting both the applicant's rights and the integrity of the firearms licensing system. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously following the established application process as outlined by Guam law and administrative rules. This includes ensuring all required documentation is submitted, background checks are conducted thoroughly and within the statutory timeframe, and any potential disqualifying factors are investigated according to established procedures. Specifically, this means verifying the applicant meets all eligibility criteria, such as residency, age, and absence of disqualifying criminal history or mental health adjudications, as mandated by Guam's firearms regulations. The justification lies in upholding the rule of law, ensuring consistent and fair application of the FID card requirements, and prioritizing public safety by adhering to the established vetting process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to expedite the FID card approval solely based on the applicant's perceived trustworthiness or a lack of immediate red flags, without completing all mandated background checks and verification steps. This fails to comply with Guam's statutory requirements for a comprehensive review, potentially compromising public safety by overlooking disqualifying information that a thorough investigation would reveal. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application based on unsubstantiated rumors or hearsay, without providing the applicant with an opportunity to respond or present evidence to refute the allegations. This violates the applicant's right to due process and fails to adhere to the procedural fairness required by Guam law, which mandates that denials be based on established legal grounds and supported by evidence. A further incorrect approach is to request additional, non-statutory documentation or impose arbitrary waiting periods beyond those prescribed by Guam law for processing an FID card application. This creates unnecessary barriers for applicants and deviates from the established regulatory framework, potentially leading to claims of procedural unfairness and administrative overreach. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Guam responsible for firearms licensing should adopt a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand and internalize all relevant Guam statutes and administrative rules governing FID card applications. Second, develop and implement a standardized checklist for each application to ensure all required documents and checks are completed. Third, maintain clear communication with applicants regarding the process and required documentation. Fourth, when encountering potential issues, consult legal counsel or supervisory personnel to ensure actions are compliant with Guam law and due process principles. Finally, prioritize fairness, transparency, and adherence to established procedures in all licensing decisions. Question 4. To address the challenge of efficiently and lawfully processing firearms identification (FID) card applications in Guam, what is the most appropriate method for gathering applicant information to ensure both public safety and respect for individual privacy? Option A. Ask for detailed personal references from individuals who have known the applicant for at least 5 years, irrespective of their knowledge of the applicant's firearm history. Option B. Require applicants to submit access to their personal social media accounts for review to assess their general online behavior. Option C. Request a comprehensive background check that includes all available public records, regardless of their direct relevance to firearm possession. Option D. Collect only the specific information explicitly authorized by Guam law for FID card eligibility and suitability assessments. The correct answer is D. Collect only the specific information explicitly authorized by Guam law for FID card eligibility and suitability assessments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to privacy and the need for thoroughness in the firearms identification (FID) card application process in Guam. Misinterpreting or misapplying the regulations can lead to either the denial of a legitimate applicant's rights or the issuance of a card to an individual who may pose a risk, both of which have serious legal and ethical ramifications under Guam law. The process demands meticulous attention to detail and a clear understanding of the scope of permissible inquiries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the enumerated grounds for inquiry as defined by Guam law concerning FID card applications. This means focusing solely on information directly relevant to determining the applicant's eligibility and suitability to possess a firearm, as outlined in the relevant statutes and regulations. This approach is correct because it respects the applicant's privacy rights while fulfilling the legal mandate to ensure public safety. It avoids overreach and ensures that the FID card process is conducted in a manner that is both lawful and ethical, preventing the collection of extraneous personal information that is not legally justifiable for the purpose of issuing an FID card. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves requesting information that is not explicitly permitted by Guam firearms regulations for the purpose of an FID card application. This could include inquiries into an applicant's political affiliations, religious beliefs, or personal financial history, beyond what is necessary to verify identity and residency. Such inquiries are ethically problematic as they infringe upon the applicant's privacy without a legitimate legal basis and could lead to discriminatory practices, violating the principles of fairness and equal treatment under the law. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any information that might seem relevant to a person's character is permissible to request. This might include asking for detailed personal references from individuals who have no direct knowledge of the applicant's firearm handling history or propensity for violence, or requesting access to social media profiles without a specific, legally sanctioned reason. This approach fails to recognize the defined scope of inquiry for FID cards and can lead to the collection of irrelevant, potentially biased, or unlawfully obtained information, thereby undermining the integrity of the application process and potentially exposing the issuing authority to legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals processing FID card applications in Guam should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to the governing statutes and regulations. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the specific information legally required and permitted for FID card eligibility. 2. Developing standardized application forms and interview protocols that align precisely with these legal requirements. 3. Training personnel on the scope of permissible inquiries and the importance of respecting applicant privacy. 4. Establishing a clear process for handling sensitive information and ensuring its secure storage and limited access. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating procedures to ensure ongoing compliance with Guam law. Question 5. The review process indicates that an applicant for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam has submitted their application with a medical certificate that is 6 months old and has not included proof of completion for the mandatory firearms safety course. Considering the regulatory framework for FID cards in Guam, which of the following actions best represents a process optimization strategy for this applicant? Option A. Advise the applicant to immediately obtain a current medical certificate and proof of completion for the mandatory firearms safety course and resubmit the complete application package to the Guam Police Department. Option B. Suggest the applicant contact a firearms dealer in Guam to inquire about any informal expedited processing methods they might be aware of. Option C. Recommend the applicant submit the application as is, with the understanding that the Guam Police Department will likely request the missing documents later in the review process. Option D. Advise the applicant to proceed with the application and explain the missing items during the interview portion of the FID card process. The correct answer is A. Advise the applicant to immediately obtain a current medical certificate and proof of completion for the mandatory firearms safety course and resubmit the complete application package to the Guam Police Department. Explanation. The review process indicates a common challenge in firearms licensing, balancing the need for thoroughness with efficient processing. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate a specific regulatory framework for Guam, ensuring all documentation is accurate and complete to avoid delays or denial. The applicant must demonstrate a clear understanding of Guam's Firearms Identification Card (FID) requirements. The best approach involves proactively gathering all necessary documentation as outlined by Guam law and the Guam Police Department (GPD) for FID card applications. This includes ensuring the applicant has completed the required training, obtained the necessary medical clearances, and provided all personal identification documents in the correct format. This proactive and compliant method ensures the application is complete from the outset, minimizing the risk of rejection due to missing or incorrect information, and aligns with the spirit of the law, which aims to ensure responsible firearm ownership. An incorrect approach would be to submit an application with incomplete documentation, such as failing to provide proof of firearms safety training or omitting required personal identification. This directly violates the explicit requirements set forth by Guam's FID card application process, leading to delays and potential denial. Another incorrect approach is to rely on outdated information or assumptions about the application process, rather than consulting the official GPD guidelines. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and can result in submitting incorrect or insufficient documentation, again contravening the established procedures. Finally, attempting to expedite the process by submitting falsified or misleading information is not only unethical but also a serious legal violation, directly undermining the integrity of the FID card system and Guam's public safety objectives. Professionals should approach FID card applications by meticulously reviewing the official requirements published by the relevant authority, in this case, the Guam Police Department. They should then systematically gather and verify each required document and piece of information. If any doubt exists regarding a requirement, the applicant should seek clarification directly from the GPD before submission. This methodical and compliant process is crucial for successful and ethical navigation of the FID card application. Question 6. Examination of the data shows an applicant for a Guam Firearms ID (FID) card has submitted an application with all requested fields filled out, but the supporting documentation includes a utility bill that is 3 months old, and the applicant has verbally stated they are a resident of Guam. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with Guam's firearms regulations? Option A. Request updated proof of residency that meets the timeframe specified in Guam's FID card application guidelines, and verify the applicant's verbal assertion of residency against other available official records if necessary. Option B. Issue the FID card with a note indicating the residency documentation is pending, allowing the applicant to possess a firearm while the residency is being re-verified. Option C. Approve the FID card application based on the applicant's verbal confirmation of residency and the submission of a utility bill, assuming the older bill is sufficient. Option D. Deny the FID card application immediately due to the outdated utility bill, without further inquiry into the applicant's residency status. Correct answer is A. Request updated proof of residency that meets the timeframe specified in Guam's FID card application guidelines, and verify the applicant's verbal assertion of residency against other available official records if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of firearms ownership and the legal requirements surrounding it in Guam. Misinterpreting or misapplying the Guam Firearms ID (FID) card regulations can lead to serious legal consequences for both the applicant and the issuing authority, potentially impacting public safety and individual rights. Careful judgment is required to ensure all statutory requirements are met accurately and efficiently. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough and systematic review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the specific requirements outlined in Guam law for obtaining a firearms ID card. This includes verifying the completeness of the application, confirming the applicant meets all eligibility criteria, such as age, residency, and absence of disqualifying criminal history or mental health adjudications as defined by Guam statutes, and ensuring all required supporting documents, like proof of identity and any necessary certifications, are present and valid. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal mandate of Guam's firearms regulations, ensuring that only qualified individuals are issued FID cards, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing process. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves approving the FID card application solely based on the applicant's assertion of meeting the requirements without independently verifying the provided information. This fails to comply with Guam's statutory duty to conduct due diligence in the FID card issuance process. It bypasses essential checks that are legally mandated to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of prohibited individuals, creating a significant regulatory and public safety failure. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application based on a personal belief or assumption about the applicant's suitability, rather than on specific disqualifying factors explicitly stated in Guam's firearms laws. This constitutes an arbitrary and capricious decision-making process, violating the applicant's right to a fair and legally grounded assessment. It also fails to uphold the principle that denials must be based on objective, statutory grounds. A further incorrect approach is to expedite the FID card process by overlooking minor discrepancies in the submitted documentation, such as an expired proof of residency. While aiming for efficiency, this practice undermines the legal framework governing FID cards. Guam law requires specific documentation to be current and valid to confirm an applicant's eligibility and identity. Overlooking such issues can lead to the issuance of FID cards to individuals who may no longer meet the established criteria, posing a risk to public safety and violating the spirit and letter of the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Guam responsible for processing FID card applications must adopt a process-driven approach. This involves understanding the specific statutory requirements of Guam law, meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation against these requirements, and maintaining detailed records of the review process. When in doubt about an applicant's eligibility or the validity of documentation, professionals should consult the relevant statutes or seek guidance from legal counsel or supervisory authorities rather than making assumptions or decisions based on personal judgment or expediency. The decision-making framework should prioritize legal compliance, public safety, and fairness to the applicant. Question 7. Upon reviewing an application for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam, an official notes the applicant has provided all standard documentation. However, the official has a personal concern about the applicant's demeanor during a brief, informal interaction, leading them to question the applicant's suitability. What is the most appropriate course of action for the official to take? Strictly adhering to the Guam Firearms Act and its implementing regulations. Option A. Approve the application immediately, assuming the applicant is suitable since all standard documentation has been provided and no explicit disqualifying factors are apparent. Option B. Deny the application based on the official's subjective concern about the applicant's demeanor, as this indicates a potential risk. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in the Guam Firearms Act and its associated regulations to determine eligibility. Option D. Request additional, non-statutory background checks or personal interviews to further assess the applicant's character beyond the scope of the Guam Firearms Act. Correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in the Guam Firearms Act and its associated regulations to determine eligibility. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam, balancing the applicant's stated intent with the legal obligations of the issuing authority. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the applicant's eligibility without overstepping legal boundaries or making assumptions, ensuring both public safety and due process. Careful judgment is required to interpret the Guam Firearms Act and its implementing regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the explicit criteria outlined in the Guam Firearms Act and its associated regulations. This includes verifying residency, age, mental competency, and the absence of disqualifying criminal history or other factors specified by law. The issuing authority must adhere strictly to the statutory requirements for issuance, ensuring that all legal prerequisites are met before approving or denying the application. This approach is correct because it is grounded in the specific legal framework of Guam, ensuring compliance with the Firearms Act and protecting the public interest by only issuing cards to qualified individuals. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to deny the application solely based on a subjective interpretation of the applicant's intent, without concrete evidence of disqualification, as defined by Guam law. This fails to adhere to the principle of due process and may constitute an arbitrary denial, violating the applicant's rights. Another incorrect approach is to approve the application without a comprehensive review of all required documentation and background checks, even if the applicant appears otherwise suitable. This bypasses the mandated safety protocols and could lead to the issuance of an FID card to an unqualified individual, posing a risk to public safety and violating the spirit and letter of the Guam Firearms Act. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to request additional documentation or information that is not explicitly authorized or required by the Guam Firearms Act or its regulations. This could be seen as an undue burden on the applicant and an overreach of authority, potentially leading to legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a systematic, evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the Guam Firearms Act and its regulations. 2. Conducting a thorough and objective review of all submitted application materials. 3. Verifying information through legally permissible channels. 4. Making a determination based solely on whether the applicant meets all statutory criteria for eligibility. 5. Documenting all findings and the basis for any decision. This ensures fairness, legality, and public safety. Question 8. When evaluating the impact of a new federal firearms law on Guam's firearms identification (FID) card application process, what is the most prudent course of action for a compliance officer to ensure continued regulatory adherence? Option A. Proceed with the current FID card application process, assuming that federal firearms laws do not directly apply to Guam unless explicitly stated by local legislation. Option B. Implement immediate changes to the FID card application process based on a preliminary understanding of the federal law, without seeking formal legal interpretation or consulting with local authorities. Option C. Conduct a detailed analysis of the new federal law's provisions and consult with Guam's legal counsel and relevant law enforcement to determine necessary modifications to the FID application process and associated procedures. Option D. Assume that the new federal law will automatically supersede all existing Guam FID card regulations without further review or consultation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed analysis of the new federal law's provisions and consult with Guam's legal counsel and relevant law enforcement to determine necessary modifications to the FID application process and associated procedures. Explanation. When evaluating the impact of a new federal firearms law on Guam's existing firearms identification (FID) card application process, a compliance officer must consider how the federal legislation might alter or supersede local requirements. The challenge lies in ensuring that the FID application process remains compliant with both Guam law and any new federal mandates, potentially requiring an update to the application forms, background check procedures, or eligibility criteria. This scenario demands a proactive and thorough impact assessment to prevent noncompliance and maintain the integrity of the firearms licensing system. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the new federal law to identify any provisions that directly affect firearms possession, transfer, or licensing within Guam. This includes analyzing how federal definitions of prohibited persons, firearm types, or registration requirements might interact with or override Guam's current FID card regulations. The compliance officer should then consult with Guam's legal counsel and relevant law enforcement agencies to interpret the federal law's applicability and determine necessary adjustments to the FID application process. This ensures that the updated process aligns with all applicable laws, safeguarding both public safety and individual rights as mandated by Guam's regulatory framework. Failing to conduct a thorough review of the federal law and instead relying solely on existing Guam regulations would be a significant oversight. This could lead to the FID application process inadvertently violating federal law, creating legal exposure for the issuing authority and potentially invalidating issued FID cards. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that federal laws automatically apply to Guam without specific legislative action or clarification, potentially leading to overreach or misinterpretation of federal authority. Finally, implementing changes to the FID process based on informal advice or assumptions without proper legal consultation risks creating an inconsistent and non-compliant system. Professionals in this situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, Identify all relevant legal frameworks, both federal and local. Second, analyze the interplay and potential conflicts between these frameworks. Third, seek expert legal interpretation to clarify ambiguities. And fourth, implement necessary procedural or documentation changes in a documented and transparent manner. Question 9. The analysis reveals that a resident of Guam who currently holds a firearms identification (FID) card is seeking to renew their card. However, they have recently been convicted of a misdemeanor offense. Considering the specific regulatory framework governing firearms in Guam, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally sound approach to address this situation? Option A. Recommend that the applicant submit their renewal application as usual and wait for the Guam Police Department to make a determination, as they may grant an exception. Option B. Inform the applicant that any misdemeanor conviction automatically disqualifies them from renewing their FID card in Guam, regardless of the nature of the offense. Option C. Suggest the applicant research general firearms laws regarding misdemeanor convictions in the United States, as Guam's laws are likely similar. Option D. Advise the applicant to consult the Guam Code Annotated, GCA, Title 9, Chapter 25, and any relevant Guam Police Department regulations to determine if their specific misdemeanor conviction disqualifies them from FID card renewal, and to gather documentation related to the conviction and its disposition. Correct answer is D. Advise the applicant to consult the Guam Code Annotated, GCA, Title 9, Chapter 25, and any relevant Guam Police Department regulations to determine if their specific misdemeanor conviction disqualifies them from FID card renewal, and to gather documentation related to the conviction and its disposition. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a firearm owner in Guam is seeking to renew their firearms identification, FID, card, but has recently been convicted of a misdemeanor offense. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of Guam's firearms laws, specifically the eligibility criteria for FID card renewal and the impact of criminal convictions on such eligibility. The applicant's recent misdemeanor conviction introduces a critical legal hurdle that must be carefully assessed against the established statutory requirements. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Guam's firearms statutes and administrative rules pertaining to FID card eligibility and renewal, with a specific focus on how misdemeanor convictions affect an applicant's ability to possess a firearm. This approach necessitates consulting the most current version of Guam Code Annotated, GCA, Title 9, Chapter 25, and any relevant regulations promulgated by the Guam Police Department. The legal framework in Guam, as outlined in these statutes, generally prohibits individuals convicted of certain offenses, including some misdemeanors, from possessing firearms. Therefore, the best professional practice is to directly ascertain if the applicant's specific misdemeanor conviction disqualifies them under Guam law. This requires a precise legal interpretation of the statute's language concerning disqualifying offenses and the look-back periods, if any, for such convictions. The ethical obligation is to provide accurate legal guidance based on the governing law, ensuring the applicant is fully informed of their rights and obligations under Guam's FID card system. An incorrect approach would be to assume that all misdemeanors are automatically disqualifying, without verifying the specific nature of the offense against Guam's statutory definitions of disqualifying crimes. This could lead to either wrongly advising the applicant that they are ineligible when they might be, or conversely, failing to identify a disqualifying offense. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on general knowledge of firearms laws in other jurisdictions, as Guam has its own distinct legal framework. This would be a direct violation of the principle of strict jurisdiction compliance. Furthermore, advising the applicant to simply submit the renewal application and hope for approval without a preliminary legal assessment of their eligibility based on the conviction would be professionally irresponsible and ethically unsound, as it fails to provide proactive and informed guidance. Professionals encountering such situations should adopt a systematic decision-making process. First, identify the specific jurisdiction and its governing laws, in this case, Guam. Second, pinpoint the relevant legal provisions pertaining to the applicant's situation, FID card, renewal, and criminal convictions. Third, conduct a precise legal analysis of the applicant's specific conviction against the statutory disqualifiers. Fourth, Communicate the findings clearly and accurately to the applicant, outlining their eligibility status and any necessary steps or potential outcomes. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that efficient processing of firearm licensing renewals is crucial for public safety and administrative effectiveness. In Guam, the Firearms Identification FID card renewal fee is statutorily set at $25.00, and a 30-day grace period is provided after the expiration date for renewal without additional penalties. If an applicant submits their FID card renewal application exactly 15 days after their card has expired, what is the correct amount they should be charged for the renewal fee? Option A, $25.00 plus a penalty fee. Option B, $12.50. Option C, $0.00. Option D, $25.00. Correct answer is D, $25.00. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of Guam's firearm licensing regulations, specifically the calculation of fees and the application of grace periods. Misinterpreting these regulations can lead to incorrect fee collection, potential noncompliance for applicants, and administrative errors. The professional must balance efficient processing with strict adherence to the law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accurately calculating the FID card renewal fee based on the statutory rate and applying the grace period only after the expiration date, as stipulated by Guam law. This approach ensures full compliance with the firearm licensing statutes, prevents undercharging or overcharging applicants, and maintains the integrity of the licensing system. The Guam Code Annotated GCA, Title 9, Chapter 7, Section 7311 outlines the renewal fee. If the renewal fee is $25.00 and the grace period is 30 days, the applicant should be charged $25.00 if they renew within 30 days of the expiration date. If they renew on the 31st day, the grace period has passed, and the full fee is due. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to apply a pro rata reduction to the renewal fee for applications submitted within the grace period. This is incorrect because Guam law does not provide for prorated renewal fees. The statute specifies a fixed renewal fee. Such an approach would result in undercollection of statutory fees. Another incorrect approach is to waive the renewal fee entirely for any application submitted within the 30-day grace period. This is incorrect, as the grace period allows for renewal without penalty or additional fees, but the renewal fee itself remains due. Waiving the fee would be a direct violation of the statutory fee requirement. A further incorrect approach is to charge the full renewal fee plus an additional penalty fee immediately upon the expiration date, without acknowledging the 30-day grace period. This is incorrect because Guam law provides a specific grace period during which renewal can occur at the standard fee. Charging a penalty before the grace period has elapsed is premature and not in accordance with the established procedure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must prioritize a thorough understanding of the governing statutes and regulations. When faced with fee calculations and grace periods, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific statutory provisions related to renewal fees and grace periods. 2. Performing precise mathematical calculations based on these provisions. 3. Consulting official guidance or legal counsel if any ambiguity exists. 4. Applying the calculated fees and grace periods consistently and accurately to all applicants. Question 11. The investigation demonstrates that an applicant for a Guam Firearms Identification (FID) card has a history of domestic violence restraining orders. Considering the potential impact on public safety and the specific legal framework governing firearms in Guam, which of the following actions represents the most prudent and legally compliant response by the Firearms Division? Option A. Rely solely on the applicant's verbal assurance that the restraining orders are resolved and do not pose a current risk, without seeking independent verification. Option B. Issue the FID card without further inquiry, assuming that any past restraining orders are no longer relevant to the applicant's current suitability to possess a firearm. Option C. Automatically deny the FID card application upon discovering any past domestic violence restraining order, irrespective of its current validity or the applicant's subsequent conduct. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's history, including the specific details, current status, and duration of all domestic violence restraining orders. and assess their eligibility against the criteria outlined in Guam's firearms laws, particularly concerning domestic violence. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's history, including the specific details, current status, and duration of all domestic violence restraining orders, and assess their eligibility against the criteria outlined in Guam's firearms laws, particularly concerning domestic violence. Explanation: the investigation demonstrates a scenario where an applicant for a Guam firearms identification (FID) card has a history of domestic violence restraining orders. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to apply for a firearm with the paramount public safety concerns mandated by Guam law. The Firearms Division must meticulously assess the risk posed by issuing an FID card to someone with a documented history of domestic disputes, as the potential for misuse of a firearm in such circumstances is significant. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with both the letter and the spirit of the law. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's entire history, specifically focusing on the nature and recency of the domestic violence restraining orders, and cross-referencing this information with Guam's eligibility criteria for FID cards. This approach is correct because Guam law, specifically Guam Code Annotated, GCA, Title 9, Chapter 10, Section 10,103, prohibits the issuance of an FID card to any person who has been convicted of a crime of violence or has been subject to a domestic violence restraining order that is still in effect or has been issued within the past 5 years, unless specific exceptions apply and are thoroughly documented and justified. A comprehensive review ensures that the Firearms Division is not only adhering to the statutory prohibitions, but also making an informed decision that prioritizes community safety. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the FID card solely based on the existence of any domestic violence restraining order, regardless of its current status or the specific circumstances. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the legal requirement for a nuanced assessment and may unfairly penalize an applicant who has demonstrated rehabilitation or whose restraining order is no longer active and poses no current threat. Another incorrect approach would be to issue the FID card without any further investigation into the restraining orders, assuming they are historical and irrelevant. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it disregards the explicit provisions in Guam law designed to prevent firearm access to individuals with a documented history of domestic violence, thereby jeopardizing public safety. Finally, relying solely on the applicant's self-reporting without independent verification of the restraining order status would be a significant procedural and regulatory failure, as it opens the door to potential misrepresentation and undermines the integrity of the FID card issuance process. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based assessment. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal requirements and prohibitions under Guam law concerning FID card eligibility. 2. Conducting a thorough background investigation, including verifying the status and nature of any restraining orders. 3. Evaluating the applicant's history in the context of the specific legal criteria, considering any mitigating factors or statutory exceptions. 4. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the rationale for approval or denial, to ensure transparency and accountability. Question 12. Analysis of an applicant's request for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam requires careful consideration of their stated purpose. If an applicant claims they need a firearm for personal protection, what is the most appropriate next step for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with Guam's firearm regulations? Option A. Immediately approve the FID card application based on the applicant's stated need for personal protection, assuming their intent is legitimate. Option B. Request that the applicant provide additional non-statutory proof of a specific imminent threat to their life before considering the application. Option C. Verify that the applicant has provided all statutorily required documentation and that their stated purpose of personal protection is a legally recognized justification for FID card issuance under Guam law, cross-referencing against eligibility criteria. Option D. Deny the FID card application due to a general concern that personal protection may not be a sufficiently serious justification for firearm ownership in Guam. The correct answer is C. Verify that the applicant has provided all statutorily required documentation and that their stated purpose of personal protection is a legally recognized justification for FID card issuance under Guam law, cross-referencing against eligibility criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam, balancing personal intent with legal obligations. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the applicant's stated purpose for firearm ownership against the documented evidence and the legal framework governing FID card issuance in Guam. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to the denial of a legitimate application, or, conversely, the issuance of a card to an individual who may not meet the statutory requirements, posing a risk to public safety. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Guam law while respecting individual rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation, specifically verifying that the stated purpose for firearm ownership aligns with the permissible reasons outlined in Guam law for FID card issuance. This includes confirming the applicant has provided all necessary supporting documents, such as proof of residency, age verification, and any required training certificates, and that these documents are current and valid. The assessment must then be cross-referenced against the eligibility criteria and disqualifying factors stipulated in Guam's firearm laws. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the statutory requirements for FID card applications in Guam, ensuring that the decision is based on objective legal standards and verifiable evidence, thereby upholding the integrity of the firearms licensing process and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to approve the FID card application solely based on the applicant's verbal assurance of their intended use, without independently verifying the supporting documentation or cross-referencing it with Guam's firearm statutes. This fails to meet the legal mandate for due diligence in assessing eligibility, and could result in issuing a card to someone who does not meet the statutory requirements, creating a public safety risk. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application based on a personal assumption or a vague concern about the applicant's character that is not supported by specific disqualifying factors enumerated in Guam law. This constitutes an arbitrary decision, potentially infringing on the applicant's rights and failing to adhere to the objective criteria established by the legislature. A further incorrect approach is to request additional documentation that is not mandated by Guam's firearm laws for FID card applications, or to impose subjective criteria not found in the statute. This can create unnecessary barriers for applicants and may be challenged as exceeding the authority granted by law. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with reviewing FID card applications in Guam should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal framework governing firearms and FID cards in Guam. 2. Carefully reviewing all submitted documentation for completeness and validity. 3. Verifying that the applicant's stated purpose for firearm ownership is a legally permissible reason under Guam law. 4. Cross-referencing the applicant's information against statutory eligibility criteria and disqualifying factors. 5. Documenting the entire decision-making process, including the evidence reviewed and the legal basis for the decision. This structured process ensures fairness, consistency, and compliance with the law. Question 13. Consider a scenario where an individual in Guam is applying for a firearms identification (FID) card and has a prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault that has since been expunged. The FID card application form asks, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" and also has a section for additional information. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to ensure compliance with Guam's FID card application requirements? Option A. Assume that because the conviction was expunged, it does not need to be disclosed on the FID card application. Option B. Only disclose the conviction if the application specifically asks about misdemeanor convictions, and omit it if the question is phrased more generally. Option C. Disclose the expunged misdemeanor conviction for simple assault in the additional information section and provide a copy of the expungement order. Option D. Contact the Guam Police Department to inquire if the expunged conviction needs to be disclosed without submitting the application, or providing the expungement order? The correct answer is C. Disclose the expunged misdemeanor conviction for simple assault in the Additional Information section and provide a copy of the expungement order. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the specific requirements of Guam's firearms identification (FID) card application process, while also considering the potential impact of a prior legal issue on their eligibility. The challenge lies in accurately assessing whether the prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault, even if expunged, necessitates disclosure and could affect the FID card application, demanding careful interpretation of Guam law and a commitment to honesty. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively disclosing the prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault, even though it was expunged, and providing all requested documentation. This approach aligns with the principle of full disclosure and honesty in applications for permits or licenses that involve public safety. Guam law, like many jurisdictions, requires applicants to disclose any criminal history, and while expungement may remove certain civil disabilities, it does not always erase the record for the purposes of specific licensing or permit applications where public safety is a paramount concern. The FID card application process is designed to vet individuals for firearm possession, and withholding relevant information, even if expunged, could be construed as misrepresentation. Providing the expungement order demonstrates transparency and allows the issuing authority to make an informed decision based on all available facts and the specific criteria outlined in Guam's firearms regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because the misdemeanor conviction was expunged, it does not need to be disclosed on the FID card application. This is a failure to understand the nuances of expungement laws in relation to specific licensing requirements. While expungement may seal records from general public view and restore certain rights, it does not automatically absolve an applicant from disclosing such history when specifically asked on an application for a permit related to public safety, such as a firearms ID card. Guam's firearms laws likely mandate disclosure of all criminal history, regardless of expungement status, to ensure thorough vetting. Another incorrect approach is to only disclose the conviction if directly asked about misdemeanor convictions, and to omit it if the question is phrased more generally, such as, "Have you ever been convicted of a crime?" This is a failure of thoroughness and honesty. The intent of such questions on an FID application is to elicit a complete picture of an applicant's history. Omitting a prior conviction, even if expunged, when a broader question is asked, can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal information and may lead to the denial of the FID card or subsequent revocation if discovered. A third incorrect approach is to contact the Guam Police Department, GPD, to inquire if the expunged conviction needs to be disclosed without actually submitting the application or providing the expungement order. While seeking clarification is generally good, this approach is insufficient because it avoids the direct responsibility of accurate application submission. The GPD's guidance might be general, and the ultimate determination rests on the completeness and truthfulness of the submitted application. Furthermore, relying solely on a verbal inquiry without documenting the disclosure on the application itself leaves room for misinterpretation and does not fulfill the applicant's obligation to provide information as required by the application form. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing similar situations should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. The decision-making process should involve 1. Thoroughly reviewing the specific application form and all accompanying instructions for any questions related to criminal history. 2. Researching the relevant statutes and regulations of Guam concerning firearms licensing and the effect of expungement on such applications. 3. When in doubt about disclosure, err on the side of over-disclosure to ensure honesty and compliance. 4. Documenting all communications and disclosures made during the application process. 5. Seeking legal counsel if the interpretation of the law or the impact of prior history remains unclear. The overarching principle is to provide complete and truthful information to the licensing authority, allowing them to make an informed decision based on all relevant facts. Question 14. During the evaluation of a firearms ID (FID) card application in Guam, an applicant submits a partially completed application form and verbally states that they will provide the missing supporting documents, such as proof of residency and a mental health clearance, within the next week. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with Guam's firearm regulations? Option A. Deny the FID card application immediately due to the incomplete submission, citing failure to meet initial application requirements. Option B. Issue the FID card provisionally based on the applicant's verbal assurance, with a condition that the remaining documents must be submitted within a specified timeframe. Option C. Request the applicant to submit all required documentation as per Guam's firearm laws before proceeding with the FID card application review. Option D. Accept the verbal assurance and proceed with the background check, assuming the applicant will eventually provide the necessary documentation. Correct answer is C. Request the applicant to submit all required documentation as per Guam's firearm laws before proceeding with the FID card application review. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's right to obtain a firearm for lawful purposes with the paramount responsibility of ensuring public safety by adhering strictly to the Guam Firearms ID (FID) card application process. Misinterpreting or overlooking statutory requirements can lead to the issuance of a FID card to an individual who may pose a risk, or conversely, unjustly denying a lawful applicant. The professional must navigate the specific legal framework of Guam, which mandates a thorough review of all submitted documentation and adherence to established criteria for eligibility. The best professional approach involves a meticulous review of the applicant's submitted documentation against the specific requirements outlined in Guam's firearm laws and regulations for FID card issuance. This includes verifying the completeness of the application, confirming the applicant meets all statutory eligibility criteria, such as age, residency, and absence of disqualifying criminal history or mental health adjudications as defined by Guam law, and ensuring all required supporting documents are present and accurate. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal mandate to ensure only qualified individuals are issued FID cards, thereby upholding public safety and fulfilling the statutory obligations of the issuing authority in Guam. An incorrect approach would be to expedite the FID card application process based on a verbal assurance from the applicant that certain documents are forthcoming or will be provided later. This fails to comply with the explicit documentation requirements stipulated by Guam's firearm laws, which are designed to provide a verifiable basis for eligibility. Such an approach risks issuing a FID card without proper due diligence, potentially to an ineligible individual, and violates the principle of strict adherence to legal procedure. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application solely based on a minor, easily correctable clerical error in the submitted paperwork, without providing the applicant an opportunity to rectify it. While accuracy is important, Guam's firearm laws generally allow for the correction of minor errors, and an outright denial without due process for such issues can be seen as an arbitrary or unreasonable application of the law, failing to uphold the applicant's right to a fair process. A further incorrect approach involves relying on information from unofficial sources or personal knowledge about the applicant's character or past behavior, rather than the documented evidence required by Guam's FID card application regulations. This bypasses the established legal framework for assessing eligibility, introduces subjective bias, and lacks the objective evidentiary basis required by law, potentially leading to both wrongful approvals and wrongful denials. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance and due diligence. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific requirements of Guam's firearm laws and FID card application procedures. 2. Conducting a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, ensuring it meets all statutory criteria. 3. Communicating clearly with applicants regarding any deficiencies or required corrections, providing reasonable opportunities to comply. 4. Documenting all steps taken and decisions made throughout the process. 5. Consulting legal counsel or supervisory authorities when encountering ambiguous situations or complex eligibility questions. This structured approach ensures fairness, legality, and the effective protection of public safety. Question 15. Research into Guam's firearms regulations indicates that an applicant for a firearms identification (FID) card has a recent misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence, What is the most appropriate course of action for a licensed firearms dealer in Guam when presented with this information? Option A. Accept the applicant's statement that their misdemeanor conviction does not impact their FID card eligibility and continue with the application process. Option B. Proceed with processing the FID card application, assuming that only felony convictions are disqualifying under Guam's firearms laws. Option C. Deny the FID card application, informing the applicant of their ineligibility due to the disqualifying nature of the domestic violence misdemeanor conviction under Guam law, and document the denial. Option D. Delay the FID card application processing and seek informal advice from other dealers to determine if the conviction is truly disqualifying. The correct answer is C. Deny the FID card application, informing the applicant of their ineligibility due to the disqualifying nature of the domestic violence misdemeanor conviction under Guam law, and document the denial. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a firearms dealer in Guam who has received an application for a firearms identification FID card from an individual with a recent misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence. The challenge lies in balancing the legal obligation to process applications with the critical responsibility of ensuring firearms are not issued to individuals legally prohibited from possessing them under Guam law. Misinterpreting or misapplying the law could lead to severe legal penalties for the dealer, and more importantly, contribute to public safety risks. Careful judgment is required to navigate the nuances of Guam's firearms regulations concerning disqualifying convictions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly reviewing Guam's firearms laws and regulations, specifically focusing on disqualifying offenses for FID card eligibility. This approach necessitates consulting the relevant sections of the Guam Code Annotated, GCA, that define prohibited persons and the types of convictions that preclude an individual from obtaining an FID card. In this case, understanding that misdemeanor convictions for domestic violence are explicitly listed as disqualifying offenses under Guam law is paramount. The dealer must then inform the applicant of their ineligibility based on this legal prohibition and deny the application, documenting the reason for denial in accordance with Guam's administrative procedures for firearms transactions. This aligns with the dealer's duty to uphold the law and prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the FID card application without a thorough review of Guam's specific disqualifying offenses, assuming all misdemeanor convictions are permissible, is a significant regulatory failure. This approach ignores the explicit provisions within the Guam Code Annotated that prohibit individuals convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors from possessing firearms. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to the statutory requirements for FID card issuance. Accepting the applicant's assertion that their misdemeanor conviction does not affect their eligibility without independent verification or legal consultation constitutes another regulatory failure. While an applicant may believe they are eligible, the responsibility for determining eligibility ultimately rests with the licensed dealer, who must verify compliance with Guam law. Relying solely on the applicant's self-assessment, especially when the conviction type is known to be disqualifying, is professionally negligent. Delaying the decision or processing the application while hoping the issue resolves itself, or seeking informal advice from non-legal sources, is also an unacceptable approach. Guam's firearms laws require a definitive determination based on established legal criteria. Indecision or procrastination in the face of a clear legal prohibition can lead to the improper issuance of an FID card, creating legal liability for the dealer and posing a risk to public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Guam dealing with firearms transactions must adopt a proactive and legally informed approach. This involves maintaining up-to-date knowledge of the Guam Code Annotated, particularly Title 9, Chapter 69, Firearms, and any relevant administrative rules and regulations. When faced with an application that raises potential eligibility concerns, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific legal provisions that govern the applicant's situation. 2. Consulting official legal resources, Guam Code Annotated, relevant case law, official guidance from the Guam Police Department or Attorney General's Office. 3. making a determination based strictly on the letter and intent of the law. 4. Documenting the decision and the legal basis for it. 5. Communicating the decision clearly and professionally to the applicant. In situations involving potential disqualifications, erring on the side of caution and strict legal compliance is always the professional and ethical imperative. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that an individual in Guam has presented a firearms identification (FID) card and expressed an intent to purchase a handgun. What is the most appropriate initial step to assess their eligibility for this purchase under Guam law? Option A. Focus on the applicant's general character and reputation without confirming the FID card specifics. Option B. Assume that any FID card automatically allows the purchase of any type of firearm. Option C. Proceed with the purchase based on the applicant's assurance that they possess a valid FID card. Option D. Verify the validity and scope of the presented FID card to ensure it permits handgun acquisition. Correct answer is D. Verify the validity and scope of the presented FID card to ensure it permits handgun acquisition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpreting the scope of a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam and its implications for an individual's ability to possess certain items. The challenge lies in distinguishing between the explicit permissions granted by the FID card and activities that might still fall outside its purview or require additional authorization under Guam law. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Firearms Act of Guam and avoid potential legal repercussions for the applicant or the entity processing the application. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the applicant's FID card, cross-referencing its validity and the specific types of firearms it permits possession of, against the applicant's stated intent to acquire a firearm. This approach directly aligns with the requirements of the Guam Firearms Act, which mandates that individuals possess a valid FID card to legally own firearms. The FID card serves as the primary legal authorization, and verifying its current status and scope is the foundational step in assessing an applicant's eligibility. This ensures adherence to the law's intent to regulate firearm ownership through a licensing and identification system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that possession of any FID card automatically grants permission to acquire any type of firearm without further verification. This fails to acknowledge that FID cards may have limitations or restrictions based on the type of firearm or the applicant's background, as stipulated by the Guam Firearms Act. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the acquisition based solely on the applicant's verbal assurance of having an FID card, without physically inspecting the card itself. This bypasses a critical verification step mandated by the law and opens the door to potential fraud or the use of invalid documentation. Finally, an approach that focuses on the applicant's general character without confirming the validity and scope of their FID card is also flawed. While character is a consideration in firearm ownership, the FID card is the specific legal instrument that permits possession, and its status must be the primary determinant. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Guam dealing with firearm acquisition applications should adopt a systematic approach. First, confirm the existence and validity of the applicant's FID card. Second, ascertain that the specific firearm the applicant wishes to acquire is covered by the permissions granted on their FID card. Third, ensure all other requirements of the Guam Firearms Act, such as background checks and any applicable waiting periods, are met. This structured process prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm stewardship. Question 17. The audit findings indicate a potential issue with the renewal process for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam. An applicant has submitted their renewal application, and while it appears generally complete, there is a slight delay in obtaining the most recent background check results from the relevant Guam law enforcement agency. Considering the regulatory framework for firearms identification cards in Guam, what is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority? Option A. Proceed with the FID card renewal, contingent upon the applicant providing the outstanding background check results within a specified, short time frame as permitted by Guam law. Option B. Expedite the renewal process by accepting an older previously submitted background check report as sufficient, given the applicant's long-standing FID card history. Option C. Deny the FID card renewal due to the incomplete application and require the applicant to resubmit the entire application once all documentation is available. Option D. Renew the FID card immediately, assuming the applicant is still eligible, and follow up on the background check results at a later date. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the FID card renewal, contingent upon the applicant providing the outstanding background check results within a specified, short time frame as permitted by Guam law. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential lapse in adherence to Guam's firearms regulations concerning the renewal process for firearms identification (FID) cards. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of Guam's specific legal requirements for firearms ownership and the renewal of FID cards, balancing the applicant's right to own firearms with public safety mandates. A failure to correctly interpret and apply these regulations can lead to significant legal repercussions for both the applicant and the issuing authority, as well as potential public safety risks. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's renewal application against the current Guam statutes and administrative rules governing FID cards. This includes verifying that all required documentation, such as proof of residency, updated background check information, and any mandated training, is present and current. The renewal process must strictly adhere to the timelines and criteria established by Guam law to ensure that only eligible individuals continue to possess firearms. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal obligation to enforce Guam's firearms control laws, ensuring public safety and maintaining the integrity of the FID card system. It prioritizes compliance with specific statutory requirements, such as those potentially outlined in Guam Code Annotated Title 9, Chapter 67, which governs firearms. An incorrect approach would be to renew the FID card, based solely on the applicant's assertion that they have met the requirements without independent verification. This fails to uphold the duty to ensure compliance with Guam's firearms laws, potentially allowing individuals who no longer meet the criteria to retain their FID cards, thereby posing a risk to public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to expedite the renewal process by overlooking minor discrepancies in the application documentation, such as an expired training certificate, without obtaining the necessary updated documentation. This bypasses the established legal procedures and could result in an FID card being issued to an unqualified individual, violating the spirit and letter of Guam's firearms regulations. Finally, an approach that relies on outdated renewal procedures or guidelines from previous years without confirming current legal requirements is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of diligence in staying abreast of legislative changes and administrative rule updates, which are critical for accurate enforcement of Guam's firearms laws. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the applicable Guam statutes and administrative rules. This should be followed by a meticulous review of each application against these legal standards, ensuring all documentation is complete and valid. When in doubt about any aspect of the application or the law, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the relevant Guam government agency responsible for firearms regulation is paramount. This systematic and diligent approach ensures compliance, protects public safety, and upholds the integrity of the FID card system. Question 18. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam has a documented history of domestic disputes, including several instances where restraining orders were issued against them. Considering the potential impact on public safety and the applicant's rights under Guam law, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Base the decision on informal reports and community gossip regarding the applicant's temperament, rather than official documentation. Option B. Issue the FID card without further investigation, assuming the applicant has met the basic requirements and that past issues are not relevant to current firearm eligibility. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all available records related to the domestic disputes and restraining orders, assessing the applicant's overall suitability for firearm possession in accordance with Guam's specific eligibility criteria, and considering any evidence of rehabilitation. Option D. Automatically deny the FID card application based on the presence of past restraining orders, as this indicates a potential risk to public safety. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of all available records related to the domestic disputes and restraining orders, assessing the applicant's overall suitability for firearm possession in accordance with Guam's specific eligibility criteria, and considering any evidence of rehabilitation. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam has a history of domestic disputes, some of which resulted in restraining orders. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to possess firearms against the paramount public safety concerns mandated by Guam law. The decision-maker must meticulously assess the applicant's suitability, considering the potential risk of future violence, without resorting to arbitrary denial. Best professional practice involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's history in light of Guam's firearms regulations. This approach necessitates a comprehensive review of all available documentation, including police reports, court records pertaining to restraining orders, and any evidence of rehabilitation or mitigating circumstances. The decision-maker must apply the specific criteria outlined in Guam law for determining eligibility, focusing on whether the applicant poses a danger to themselves or others. This aligns with the ethical obligation to uphold public safety while adhering to due process for the applicant. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the FID card solely based on the existence of past restraining orders, without a deeper investigation into the nature of those orders, their duration, and the applicant's subsequent conduct. This fails to comply with Guam's legal framework, which requires an individualized assessment rather than a blanket prohibition. Such an approach could lead to an unlawful denial and potential legal challenges. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to grant the FID card without adequately considering the documented history of domestic disputes and restraining orders. This disregards the clear intent of firearms legislation to prevent individuals with a propensity for violence from acquiring firearms, thereby jeopardizing public safety and violating the core principles of responsible firearm regulation in Guam. A third incorrect approach involves relying on hearsay or unsubstantiated rumors about the applicant's character, rather than verifiable facts and official records. This introduces an element of bias and unreliability into the decision-making process, undermining the integrity of the FID card application review and potentially leading to an erroneous decision that compromises public safety or unfairly denies the applicant's rights. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant Guam statutes and administrative rules governing FID cards. This involves gathering all pertinent information, objectively evaluating it against the legal criteria, considering any mitigating or aggravating factors, and documenting the rationale for the final decision. This systematic approach ensures fairness, legality, and a commitment to public safety. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a potential applicant for a firearms identification (FID) card in Guam has a history of documented domestic disputes that led to restraining orders, though no criminal convictions for violent offenses are present. The Guam Police Department (GPD) is reviewing the application. Which of the following approaches best balances public safety with the applicant's rights under Guam law? Option A. Approve the FID card application based on an informal verbal recommendation from a community member who knows the applicant. Option B. Deny the FID card application outright due to the presence of restraining orders without further investigation. Option C. Approve the FID card application immediately, as there are no criminal convictions for disqualifying offenses. Option D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the circumstances of the domestic disputes and the applicant's overall history to assess good moral character before making a decision. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough investigation into the circumstances of the domestic disputes and the applicant's overall history to assess good moral character before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to pursue a lawful activity, firearm ownership, with the paramount public safety mandate of the Guam Police Department, GPD. The challenge lies in interpreting the good moral character requirement, which is subjective, and ensuring that the GPD's decision-making process is consistent, fair, and legally defensible under Guam law, specifically the Guam Code Annotated GCA Title 9, Chapter 66, concerning firearms. A hasty or overly lenient decision could compromise public safety, while an overly strict or arbitrary decision could infringe upon an individual's rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, documented review of all submitted information, coupled with a diligent investigation into any red flags or ambiguities concerning the applicant's past. This approach aligns with the GPD's responsibility to uphold public safety while adhering to the legal standards for FID card issuance. Specifically, under GCA Title 9, Chapter 66, the Chief of Police is empowered to issue FID cards, but must ensure applicants meet the criteria, including demonstrating good moral character. This necessitates a proactive and investigative stance, not merely a passive acceptance of the application. The GPD must gather sufficient evidence to support its determination, whether for approval or denial, ensuring that the decision is based on objective facts and a reasonable interpretation of good moral character as it pertains to firearm possession. This includes considering any prior criminal history, documented instances of violence or instability, or other behaviors that would reasonably suggest a risk to public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to approve the FID card application solely based on the absence of a direct criminal conviction for a disqualifying offense, without further investigation into the applicant's history of domestic disputes or restraining orders. This fails to adequately assess good moral character, as required by GCA Title 9, Chapter 66. While not a criminal conviction, documented instances of domestic violence or behavior leading to restraining orders can be strong indicators of a potential risk to public safety, which the GPD has a duty to mitigate. Another incorrect approach is to deny the FID card application immediately upon discovering the applicant was involved in a civil dispute that resulted in a restraining order, without conducting a comprehensive review of the circumstances surrounding the dispute or considering the applicant's subsequent behavior. This approach is overly punitive and may not align with the spirit of the law, which requires a reasoned assessment of an applicant's character in relation to firearm safety. The GPD must investigate the nature of the dispute and the applicant's overall history to make an informed decision. A third incorrect approach is to approve the FID card application based on a personal acquaintance's informal assurance of the applicant's good character, without any formal documentation or independent verification. This bypasses the established procedures for assessing an applicant's suitability and relies on subjective, unverified information, which is insufficient to meet the GPD's legal obligation to ensure public safety under Guam law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Guam Code Annotated, Title 9, Chapter 66. 2. Conducting a thorough review of all application materials. 3. Proactively investigating any information that raises concerns about an applicant's suitability, particularly regarding good moral character and public safety. 4. Documenting all findings and the rationale for the final decision. 5. Ensuring that decisions are consistent and fair, avoiding arbitrary judgments or reliance on unsubstantiated claims. This structured approach ensures compliance with the law and upholds the GPD's critical public safety mission. Question 20. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Guam Firearms ID, FID, card applicant who claims to have resided on the island for 11 months and 15 days, and needs to determine their eligibility based on the statutory residency requirement of 12 continuous months? Option A. Calculate the exact number of days the applicant has resided in Guam and determine if this meets or exceeds the 12-month requirement, considering that 12 months is equivalent to 365 days for this purpose. Option B. Estimate the applicant's residency period by adding a few extra days to their stated 11 months and 15 days to round it up to 12 months for the purpose of initial assessment. Option C. Advise the applicant that they are close to meeting the requirement and suggest they submit the application, as the authorities may grant an exception for a short period. Option D. Inform the applicant that they do not meet the 12-month requirement and that they must wait until they have completed a full 12 months, without performing any specific calculation of their current residency duration. The correct answer is A. Calculate the exact number of days the applicant has resided in Guam and determine if this meets or exceeds the 12-month requirement, considering that 12 months is equivalent to 365 days for this purpose. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate their eligibility based on specific Guam firearms laws, which may involve understanding residency requirements and potential disqualifying factors that could impact the firearms identification (FID) card application. Precise adherence to the law is paramount to ensure the applicant is legally permitted to possess a firearm. The best approach involves a meticulous review of the applicant's residency documentation and a direct calculation of the required duration of residency in Guam, cross-referenced with Guam Public Law 27-73, Section 14803. This approach ensures that all legal prerequisites are met before advising the applicant on the next steps. Calculation would involve determining the number of full months the applicant has resided in Guam and comparing it to the statutory requirement. For instance, if the law requires 12 months of continuous residency, and the applicant has provided documentation showing they moved to Guam on March 15, 2023, the calculation would be from March 2023 to March 2024, totaling 12 months. This direct, legally compliant calculation is the only way to definitively assess eligibility under Guam law. An incorrect approach would be to estimate the residency period based on the applicant's verbal assertion, without verifying supporting documentation. This fails to adhere to the legal requirement for proof of residency and could lead to an FID card being issued to an ineligible individual, violating Guam Public Law 27-73. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on general knowledge of firearms laws in other jurisdictions, as Guam has its own specific statutes. This demonstrates a failure to apply the correct legal framework and could result in misinterpreting eligibility criteria. Finally, advising the applicant to proceed with the application based on a partial fulfillment of residency requirements, hoping for an exception, is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses the legal mandate and undermines the integrity of the FID card issuance process. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes legal compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of the jurisdiction, Guam Public Law 27-73. 2. Gathering all necessary documentation from the applicant. 3. Performing precise calculations based on the documented evidence and legal statutes. 4. Providing advice solely based on the verified legal eligibility.